He opened his lunchbox, only for his teacher to snatch it away and toss it in the trash. The cafeteria roared with laughter while a 12-year-old boy sat hungry, humiliated and silent. But what no one knew was that his father had hidden something inside that lunchbox the next day. And when the truth came out, the entire school was left in shock. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The cafeteria of Ridgeway Middle School buzzed with its usual lunchtime chaos, trays clattering, sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum, kids calling across tables to friends. It was the kind of noise that made teachers hover on the edges of the room, arms folded, pretending to supervise but secretly relieved to have a break from lessons. At one of the long tables near the center sat Jamal Carter, a boy of 12 with thoughtful brown eyes that often seemed older than his age. He wasn't the loud type. If anything, he blended in so well that teachers barely noticed him, except one. Jamal set his backpack on the bench and unzipped it carefully, as though opening something sacred. Inside was the lunch his father had packed that morning: baked chicken, collard greens, and cornbread wrapped neatly in foil. The smell of home drifted out, warm and comforting, pulling Jamal momentarily away from the clamor of the cafeteria. He lifted the foil, ready for that first bite, when a shadow fell over him. Jamal Carter. The voice was clipped, sharp like chalk screeching against a board. He froze. Slowly, he looked up into the face of Mrs. Whitaker, his homeroom teacher. She was tall, with pale thin lips always pursed, like she was smelling something unpleasant. Her eyes scanned him not with concern, but with the precision of someone searching for fault. "Yes, ma'am." His voice barely carried above the lunchroom noise. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached down and plucked the foil-wrapped lunch right out of his hands. Gasps and giggles rippled from the kids nearby. "School policy," Mrs. Whitaker said coolly, holding the lunch up for everyone to see. "No outside hot meals. You know that." Jamal blinked, confused. He had never heard of such a rule. Around him, kids were unwrapping Subway sandwiches, opening takeout boxes, and digging into bags of chips. "But my dad packed this," Jamal said softly, his hands still hovering in midair. "Empty." Mrs. Whitaker leaned down, her voice low but cutting. "Rules are rules. You'll eat from the cafeteria line like everyone else." The truth was obvious to every watching eye. Not everyone was being treated the same. But in the hierarchy of middle school, no one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Some kids snickered, others stared, and a few looked away, unwilling to meet Jamal's gaze. Jamal's chest tightened as she walked away with his food. He wanted to protest, to tell her she was wrong, but the weight of her authority crushed him silent. He sat there, staring at the table, his appetite replaced by the bitter taste of humiliation. Across the room, Ethan Caldwell, one of the popular white boys in his class, leaned over to his friend and whispered loudly enough for half the table to hear, "Guess fried chicken's not on the school-approved list." The laughter that followed burned hotter than hunger in Jamal's stomach. He clenched his fists under the table, pressing them into his thighs until they hurt, just to stop himself from crying. He stood up quietly and walked to the cafeteria line, but by the time he reached the trays, his appetite was gone. He picked at a bland slice of pizza, the kind that tasted more like cardboard than food. Each bite reminded him that his father's cooking, the taste of home, was gone, tossed aside like it didn't belong. The lunch period dragged on. Jamal felt the stares lingering, not constant but enough to keep him uneasy. When the bell finally rang, he shoved his untouched pizza in the trash and slung his backpack over his shoulder, his steps heavy as he left the cafeteria. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. His teachers' voices became muffled noise, his friends chatted around him, but their words slipped past without meaning. All he could think about was the look on Mrs. Whitaker's face, stern, dismissive, final, and the sound of Ethan's laughter echoing in the background. By the time the dismissal bell rang, Jamal's body ached with exhaustion. He trudged to the bus, slumping into a seat by the window. The ride home was long and quiet, broken only by the chatter of kids planning after-school games. His stomach growled, but he pressed his backpack against it, willing the sound to stop. When the bus finally pulled up to his street, Jamal stepped down and spotted his father waiting at the corner. Marcus Carter was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, dressed in his work uniform from the auto shop. His hands were always marked with grease stains that never seemed to wash away, but his smile, usually quick and warm, had a way of making Jamal feel safe. Today, though, Marcus's smile faltered as soon as he saw his son's face. "Hey champ," Marcus said, taking the backpack from him. "How was school?" Jamal shrugged, eyes on the ground. It was fine. But Marcus knew his son. He saw the slump in his shoulders, the way Jamal avoided his gaze. As they walked home, Marcus asked again, more carefully, "Did you eat your lunch?" "I packed your favorite." Jamal hesitated. The words caught in his throat. He wanted to tell his father everything. But the memory of Mrs. Whitaker's cold stare and the kids' laughter weighed on him. If his own classmates hadn't defended him, would anyone believe him? "Yeah," Jamal lied softly. "I ate it." Marcus nodded, but his eyes narrowed. Something about the way his son's voice cracked told him it wasn't the truth. Inside their small but tidy kitchen, Marcus unpacked his own dinner from a takeout bag, sliding a container toward Jamal. "Here, eat this. You look like you haven't had a bite all day." Jamal took the container, his fingers trembling slightly. He wanted to eat, but guilt pressed against his chest. He hated lying to his father. Marcus worked long hours, sometimes skipping meals himself to make sure Jamal never went hungry. And yet here he was, sitting at the table, pretending. Marcus sat across from him, watching. "You were quiet today. Something happened?" Jamal shook his head quickly. "No, sir." The silence that followed was thick, heavier than the ticking clock on the wall. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying his son's tired eyes, the way he barely touched the food in front of him. He didn't push further, not yet. But deep down, Marcus knew something was wrong. That night, after Jamal went to bed, Marcus picked up his son's backpack to clean out the lunch containers. He unzipped the main pocket and reached inside. His hand paused when he felt something unexpected. Foil still wrapped, untouched. Marcus pulled it out slowly. His breath caught in his throat. It was the lunch he had packed that morning. Still wrapped, still full, unneat. Marcus stared at it, his mind racing. Why would Jamal lie? Why would his lunch come back untouched? The clock ticked louder in the silence of the kitchen. Marcus's jaw tightened as he placed the foil back on the counter, the weight of suspicion pressing down harder than he wanted to admit. And in that moment a thought struck him, sharp and unsettling. Someone had taken his son's lunch from him. Marcus Carter stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the untouched meal. His son's lie was not about hunger. It was about humiliation. But who would take food from a child? The next morning, the kitchen smelled of fried onions and warm cornbread. Marcus Carter was already at the stove before the sun rose, moving with practiced ease in the small, tidy space. Cooking wasn't just a chore to him, it was his ritual, his way of making sure his son felt cared for, even when the world outside their home tried to strip that care away. He packed Jamal's lunch with the same precision he gave to fixing cars at the shop. Baked chicken thighs, seasoned just right, with sides of mac and cheese and collard greens. He wrapped each dish carefully in foil and placed them in separate containers, sliding the whole lunch into Jamal's backpack with quiet pride. As he zipped it closed, he smiled to himself. "My boy's not gonna go hungry today." When Jamal shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, Marcus ruffled his hair. "Morning, champ. You're set for lunch. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You eat every bite." Jamal gave a small nod, forcing a smile. "Yes, sir." But behind the boy's polite reply, Marcus noticed the hesitation, the way Jamal's eyes darted away, the way he clutched the straps of his backpack like it was heavier than it should be. Marcus chalked it up to the nerves of another school day and let it go. For now, at school, Jamal carried the backpack with the weight of a secret. He knew what would happen if Mrs. Whitaker saw it again. The memory of her cold fingers plucking his food away, the laughter that followed, and Ethan's cruel joke, "Fried chicken's not on the school-approved list," still burned in his chest. As he sat in his first period class, the thought gnawed at him. What if she takes it again? What if she laughs this time? By the time the lunch bell rang, Jamal's palms were slick with sweat. He didn't dare open the backpack in the cafeteria. Instead, he quietly slipped into the bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and sat there with his backpack on his lap. He unzipped it just enough to peek inside at the foil-wrapped containers. The food still smelled like home, like safety. But he didn't take a bite. He couldn't risk being caught. The stall door felt like a shield, but it was also a prison. Jamal sat there until the noise of the cafeteria faded, his stomach twisting in protest. When the bell finally rang to end lunch, he zipped the backpack closed again, untouched. Back at home that evening, Marcus noticed something strange. Jamal tore into the plate of food set before him with a hunger that seemed bigger than usual. He ate fast, barely pausing to breathe between bites. "Slow down, champ," Marcus said gently. "Nobody's taking it from you." Jamal froze for just a moment, then resumed eating, more carefully this time. He didn't answer. Marcus leaned back, watching his son. "Did you eat your lunch at school today?" "Yes, sir," Jamal said quickly. Too quickly. Marcus nodded, but the words landed heavy in his ears. He knew when his boy was lying. He'd heard that same shaky tone when Jamal had once tried to cover up a broken window playing ball in the street. Something wasn't adding up. Over the next few days, Marcus continued packing lunches with care. Roast beef sandwiches one day, leftover jambalaya another. Each morning, Jamal left the house with his backpack full. Each evening, he returned home starving. "Boy eats like he's been fasting all day," Marcus muttered to himself one night, as he scraped dishes into the sink. But Jamal stayed quiet, refusing to explain. The silence stretched like a wire between them, tight and dangerous. Marcus didn't want to push too hard. He remembered being Jamal's age, how pride could lock a boy's tongue. But he also knew silence could crush a child if it carried too much weight. By the fourth day, Marcus decided to check the backpack himself. He waited until Jamal was in the shower, then pulled the bag onto the kitchen table. Slowly, carefully, he unzipped it. Inside were not one, but 3 lunch containers, each still wrapped in foil, untouched. The chicken thighs, the roast beef sandwiches, the jambalaya, all spoiled now. The smell faint, but unmistakable. Marcus's chest tightened. His first thought was anger. Anger that his son had lied. Anger that the food he had worked for, sweated for, had been wasted. But beneath the anger came something heavier. Fear. Why wasn't Jamal eating? Marcus sat at the table with the containers spread before him, his hands gripping the edges like they were evidence in a trial. He imagined his son sitting at school surrounded by other kids with their sandwiches and pizza, his own food hidden away in shame. The thought cut deeper than any blade. Later that night, when Jamal came out of the shower, Marcus called him into the kitchen. The containers were still laid out on the table, the foil peeled back to expose the uneaten meals. "Sit down," Marcus said, his voice low, steady. Jamal froze in the doorway. His eyes flicked to the containers, then to his father. He didn't move. "Sit," Marcus repeated, this time firmer. Jamal slid into a chair, his shoulders hunched, his hands knotted in his lap. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Why are these still in your bag? Why aren't you eating at school?" Jamal opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence between them thickened until Marcus could hear the hum of the refrigerator. "Talk to me, champ. Did someone say something? Did something happen?" Jamal's eyes filled with tears. He fought hard to hold back. "You wouldn't believe me," he whispered. The words pierced Marcus's chest. "Try me," he said softly. But Jamal only shook his head, his jaw tight. "It doesn't matter." Marcus wanted to press, to demand answers, but the look in his son's eyes stopped him. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. Fear of something larger than hunger, larger than shame. That night, long after Jamal had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the spoiled lunches, his fists clenched against the wood, knuckles white. He thought about the morning spent cooking, about the pride he felt sliding those meals into the backpack, about the way his son's smile had dimmed over the past week. Something was happening to Jamal, something that made him hide in silence. Marcus swore to himself that he would find out what. As he stood to throw the spoiled food away, he noticed something else tucked deep in the side pocket of the backpack. He pulled it out carefully. It was a folded piece of paper, crumpled at the edges, with a scrawled note in handwriting that wasn't Jamal's. Marcus unfolded it, his eyes narrowing as he read the words. "If you bring that kind of food again, it's going straight in the trash. School rules. Mrs. W." Marcus's stomach dropped. The spoiled food was one thing, but now, with this note in hand, Marcus knew the truth was far darker than he imagined. Marcus didn't sleep that night. The crumpled note sat on the table in front of him, lit by the dim glow of the kitchen lamp. His eyes traced the crooked handwriting over and over. "If you bring that kind of food again, it's going straight in the trash. School rules. Mrs. His jaw tightened. He knew school rules well enough. He'd signed the handbook at the start of the year, same as every parent. There was nothing in it that said a child couldn't eat home-cooked meals. And even if there was, Why single out Jamal? The note wasn't about food. It was about something else. When Jamal came into the kitchen the next morning, he paused at the sight of his father sitting there with the note spread out like evidence in a trial. His backpack hung loose from one shoulder, his face pale. "Sit down, champ," Marcus said, voice low but steady. Jamal sank into the chair, eyes down. Marcus held up the paper. "You want to explain this?" For a long moment the boy said nothing. Then his lips parted, his voice fragile. "She said my food wasn't healthy, too greasy, not nutritious." Marcus's heart sank at the words. He leaned back slowly, staring at his son. "Who said that?" "Mrs. Whitaker." Jamal's voice cracked on the name. "She takes it away every time, says it's school policy." Marcus clenched the note so hard it crumpled further. Too greasy, not nutritious. He thought about the careful meals he had made. Baked chicken, vegetables, rice, fruit, food he cooked with pride, food that connected Jamal to home. His chest tightened. He knew exactly what this was. "She only says that to you?" Marcus asked carefully. Jamal nodded. "Other kids bring food all the time. Pizza, burgers. Nobody takes it." Marcus inhaled slowly, his nostrils flaring. He had always told himself that maybe, just maybe, times had changed since he was Jamal's age. That maybe his son wouldn't have to face the same quiet humiliations he'd endured. But hearing it laid out so plainly, his boy singled out, his food mocked as unworthy. It reopened an old wound Marcus thought he'd buried. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Champ, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Jamal's eyes glistened. "Because no one believes kids. She's the teacher. Everyone listens to her, not me. If I say something, it'll just get worse." Marcus's throat tightened. The silence of his son carried more weight than any complaint. This wasn't just about hunger, it was about dignity being stripped away piece by piece. He reached across the table, resting a calloused hand over Jamal's. "You hear me? I believe you. Always." The boy nodded, but his shoulders remained tense, as if he couldn't quite let go of the fear. That afternoon Marcus tried calling the school. He asked to speak with the principal, Mr. Keller, but was told Keller was unavailable. He left a message anyway, his voice steady though his chest burned with frustration. When the call wasn't returned, Marcus called again, and again. By the end of the day he had left 3 messages, each sharper than the last. Still, silent. He knew exactly what that silence meant. The system was already closing its ranks. That evening, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, sketching in a notebook, his pencil scratching nervously across the page. Marcus watched him from the stove, fighting to keep his expression calm. He couldn't let his anger spill onto his son, not when Jamal was already carrying so much. Finally, Marcus sat down across from him. "Listen to me, champ. We're not letting this go. Nobody takes food out your hands and calls it policy." Jamal's eyes flicked up, uncertain. "But what if they don't believe you either?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice quiet but full of steel. "Then I'll make them believe. I don't care if it's the principal, the superintendent, or the whole school board. Nobody humiliates my son and gets away with it." For the first time in days, Jamal's lips curved into the faintest smile. But it was fleeting. He lowered his eyes again, still burdened by doubt. Marcus saw it. And in that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for phone calls. He wasn't going to let someone else decide if his son's voice mattered. He would get proof. Late that night, after Jamal had gone to bed, Marcus sat in the living room, with the note in his hand. The television flickered in the background, but he wasn't watching. His mind replayed Jamal's words, the way his voice broke when he said, "She takes it every time." Marcus thought about his own childhood teachers who made comments about his attitude, coaches who assumed he was lazy, classmates who joked about his skin as though it was harmless fun. He had swallowed it all back then, because fighting only made it worse. But now it was happening again, through his son. And this time, Marcus refused to stay silent. The next morning, Marcus moved quietly around the kitchen. He packed Jamal's lunch, as always, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on the plan already forming. He handed the backpack to his son with a steady smile. "Eat your lunch today, champ," he said softly. Jamal nodded, though Marcus could see the hesitation in his eyes, the weight of a week's worth of humiliation pressing down on him. When the boy left for school, Marcus stood at the window, watching him walk down the street, toward the bus stop. His jaw tightened with resolve. He wasn't just sending his son off to school anymore. He was sending him into a battlefield where the rules were rigged against him. And Marcus Carter had never been the type to let his boy fight alone. Marcus tightened his grip on the windowsill, a promise burning in his chest. Tomorrow he wouldn't just pack Jamal's lunch. He would follow him quietly, carefully, and see for himself what Mrs. Whitaker dared to do. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself shared Marcus Carter's unease. He had risen before Jamal, packed his son's lunch, roast chicken with rice, apple slices and a square of cornbread, and slid it into the backpack with steady hands. But his mind was fixed on the promise he'd made to himself. Today, he would see the truth with his own eyes. "Eat well, champ," Marcus said as Jamal grabbed the backpack. His tone was careful, even. "Yes, sir," Jamal murmured, already bracing for what the day might bring. Marcus watched him leave, then grabbed his jacket and keys. He didn't tell his boss at the auto shop he'd be late. Some things couldn't wait. He drove slowly to the school, parking a block away so Jamal wouldn't see his truck. He waited until the morning rush died down before slipping into the building. Years of working with his hands had made Marcus quiet on his feet. He blended in with the stream of parents dropping off forms, the handful of volunteers setting up for a fundraiser. By the time the lunch bell rang, Marcus was already inside. He positioned himself near the cafeteria's side entrance, just beyond the swinging doors. From there he had a clear line of sight to Jamal's table, though hidden enough that no one noticed him. The cafeteria was a loud sea of chatter and clattering trays. Kids dumped chips onto napkins, unwrapped sandwiches from foil, and passed juice boxes back and forth. Jamal sat in the middle, his backpack beside him, waiting for a quiet moment before unzipping it. Marcus's heart clenched watching his son's small, careful movements, like a boy afraid of being caught doing something wrong, when all he wanted was to eat. Then came the shadow. Mrs. Whitaker. She moved through the rows like a patrolling guard, her eyes darting left and right. Marcus tensed, his fists curling in his jacket pockets. She didn't glance at the pizza slices greasy enough to drip through paper napkins. She didn't pause at the kids guzzling energy drinks. But when her gaze landed on Jamal, her lips tightened. "Jamal Carter," she said, sharp enough to cut through the noise. Marcus's son froze. Slowly, Jamal lifted his gaze. "Hand it over," Mrs. Whitaker said, already reaching down. Marcus leaned forward, his chest burning. He watched as her pale hand plucked the foil-wrapped chicken and apple slices straight from Jamal's lunchbox. "Not again," Jamal whispered, barely audible. "School rules," she replied crisply. Marcus's eyes darted around the room. Not a single other child had been approached. Not one. A white boy, 2 tables away, stuffed half a cheeseburger into his mouth, ketchup dripping down his chin, and Mrs. Whitaker didn't so much as blink. It wasn't about rules. It was about Jamal. And the cruelty was in plain sight. Jamal stared at the table, his small fists pressed into his thighs. Around him, the whispers started. A giggle. A muttered comment. Marcus couldn't hear them all, but he caught one boy snickering. "Guess his dad doesn't know how to cook school food." The shame on his son's face was unbearable. Marcus's blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay still. He wanted to storm through the doors, snatch the food back, and demand answers right then. But his gut told him to wait to watch longer, to gather more than just anger. Because anger alone wouldn't protect Jamal. After lunch, Marcus slipped out of the school and back to his truck, his chest tight with rage. He sat gripping the steering wheel, replaying the scene over and over. Mrs. Whitaker hadn't even looked guilty. She'd done it casually, as if it were routine. How many times has she done this? The thought gnawed at him as he drove to the auto shop, but he could barely focus on work. Every wrench he turned, every bolt he tightened, was just a way of holding back the storm inside. By the time he picked Jamal up after school, Marcus's decision was made. He wasn't going to let another day pass. The next morning, Marcus walked into Ridgeway Middle, with his son, heading straight to the front office. The secretary looked startled, as he asked firmly, "I need to see Principal Keller, now." "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice practiced and polite. "No," Marcus said flatly, "but he'll want to hear what I've got to say." Something in his tone made her hesitate before disappearing into the back. Minutes later, a tall, balding man in a navy suit stepped out. His smile was forced too wide. "Mr. Carter, is it? Come in." Marcus followed him into the office, the walls lined with framed degrees and school achievement plaques. Keller gestured to a chair.
What seems to be the issue?
Marcus sat forward, his forearms resting on his knees. The issue is your teacher, Mrs. Whitaker, stealing my son's lunch in front of the whole cafeteria. I saw it with my own eyes yesterday. Keller's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flicked briefly to the side before returning. I think you may be misunderstanding. Mrs. Whitaker is one of our most respected staff members. Marcus's voice sharpened. I'm not misunderstanding. She walked up to my son, took the food I packed, and threw it away. She didn't do it to anyone else. Just him. Keller clasped his hands on the desk. Sometimes teachers have to enforce policies children don't understand. It can feel unfair, but there is no policy, Marcus snapped, his voice rising. I read your handbook front to back. You want to talk policy? Fine. Show me where it says a child can't eat food his father packed. Keller leaned back, his smile tightening. Perhaps Mrs. Whitaker was concerned about nutrition. We've had guidelines come down from the district, healthy options, limiting fried foods, that sort of thing. Marcus's chest burned. Healthy options? You got kids in there eating French fries and pizza every day. You think baked chicken and apples aren't good enough, but greasy cafeteria food is? The principal adjusted his tie, his voice smoothing out like oil over water. I understand your concern, but I'm sure this is just a miscommunication. Mrs. Whitaker would never intentionally target a student. Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Miscommunication. I watched her take my boy's lunch. That's not a miscommunication. That's humiliation. And I won't let it happen again. Keller raised his hands slightly, his calm demeanor unshaken. Please, Mr. Carter. There's no need to escalate this. I'll speak to Mrs. Whitaker and clarify expectations. I'm certain it won't happen again. But Marcus could see the truth in the principal's eyes. Keller wasn't going to do anything. He was already closing ranks around his teacher. Marcus's jaw clenched. He knew that look. It was the same look he'd seen too many times in his own life, when authority decided a black man's word wasn't enough. Marcus walked out of the principal's office with his fists clenched, a storm brewing inside him. He had proof in his memory, fury in his chest, but no justice. And now he realized Mrs. Whitaker's cruelty might run deeper than he thought. The ride home from the principal's office was heavy with silence. Jamal sat in the passenger seat, clutching his backpack as though bracing for bad news. Marcus gripped the wheel, his knuckles pale, his jaw locked tight. He didn't want his anger to spill onto his son, but the words miscommunication echoed like a taunt in his head. When they pulled into the driveway, Marcus shut off the engine and turned to Jamal. His voice was steady, but sharp around the edges. Champ, listen to me. I talked to Keller. He's not gonna do a thing. They're protecting her. Jamal's shoulders sagged. He stared at the dashboard. I told you, he said softly. No one listens. The words pierced Marcus deeper than any insult could. His son wasn't surprised. That was what hurt most. Jamal already knew what it meant to be dismissed. The next day at school, Jamal moved carefully, like someone trying not to be noticed, but whispers had a way of finding him. In the cafeteria line, while he reached for a carton of milk, a girl behind him leaned closer. You too? She asked quietly. Jamal turned. It was Aaliyah Brooks, a shy 8th grader with braids tucked neatly under a headband. Her eyes darted nervously toward Mrs. Whitaker, who hovered by the far wall watching. What do you mean? Jamal whispered back. Aaliyah hesitated, then shrugged. She took my art project, said it was missing requirements. I worked on it for weeks. Then it just disappeared. She told the class I never turned it in. Jamal frowned. Did you tell the principal? Her laugh was bitter, too mature for her age. He told me to try harder next time. Before Jamal could respond, Mrs. Whitaker called Aaliyah's name sharply, and she fell silent, her face closing like a locked door. That evening, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, picking at his food. Marcus watched him, sensing a storm beneath the boy's silence. You got something on your mind, champ? Marcus asked. Jamal hesitated, then spoke softly. Dad, I'm not the only one. Other kids. She does things to them too. Aaliyah said her project disappeared, and he swallowed hard. Devin told me she gives him detention all the time, for nothing. He raised his hand too slow once. That's all. Marcus set his fork down slowly. So it's not just the lunches. Jamal shook his head. She doesn't like us, people like us. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just about humiliation. It was about erasure. Piece by piece, Mrs. Whitaker was cutting children out of their own classrooms, making them invisible where they should have been seen. Over the next few days, more stories reached Jamal in fragments, whispered in hallways, muttered behind textbooks. A boy named Terrence said his science project, a volcano built with his uncle, had been marked incomplete, even though the eruption worked perfectly. A girl named Nia confessed that Mrs. Whitaker once told her she spoke too ghetto when she answered a question in class, then docked her participation grade. None of them had complained to their parents anymore. They'd tried once or twice, but their families got the same answer. Marcus had. Mrs. Whitaker is a respected teacher. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The same word Keller had thrown at Marcus. Smooth as poison. One afternoon, Jamal came home quiet as usual. But when Marcus pressed him, he finally spoke. "Dad, what if she makes me fail?" Jamal whispered. "What if she just decides?" Marcus leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "Then we fight it. We don't stay quiet. You hear me?" Jamal's eyes glistened. But no one listens. Marcus exhaled slowly, his chest aching. "Then we'll make them listen." But even as he said it, a hollow doubt echoed in him. He remembered Aaliyah's bitter laugh, the way Devon's shoulders slumped, the silence of kids who'd already learned their voices didn't matter. That night, Marcus sat in Jamal's room while his son pretended to do homework. He noticed the boy's handwriting falter on the page, the numbers slipping crooked. Jamal wasn't focused on math. His thoughts were elsewhere. "Champ," Marcus said quietly, "you're not just dealing with hunger. You're dealing with someone trying to erase you, to make you feel small, like you don't matter." Jamal stared at the paper, then whispered, "What if she wins?" Marcus's throat tightened. He reached over, resting a firm hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Then she'll know she didn't win easy, that you had people standing behind you." Jamal nodded, but his eyes didn't brighten. Later, when Marcus was alone in the kitchen, he pulled out a notepad and began to write down names. Aaliyah, Devon, Terrence, Nia. Each one represented a child who had whispered about Mrs. Whitaker's cruelty. He stared at the list, the letters swimming in his vision. It wasn't just Jamal anymore. This was bigger. And yet when he thought of Keller brushing him off, of the smug calm in the principal's eyes, he felt the weight of futility pressing down. Who would listen to him? To any of them? The silence of children was convenient for the adults in charge. Silence meant no trouble. Silence meant Mrs. Whitaker could keep smiling for parents' night while tearing down their kids one by one. The next morning, Marcus tucked the notepad into his jacket. He had planned to go straight to the superintendent's office with the list. But as he dropped Jamal off at school, something made him pause. He watched his son disappear into the building, the backpack heavy on his shoulders. He thought about the whispered voices, the stolen projects, the empty detentions, and then, suddenly, the weight of it all hit him. This wasn't about lunches anymore. It was about erasure, about his son and others like him being erased in plain sight. Hungry, silenced, made invisible. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel. As the thought sank in, his son wasn't just facing hunger. He was facing a teacher determined to erase him. And Marcus realized with chilling clarity, if he didn't act soon, Jamal might start believing he deserved it. Marcus sat at the kitchen table late into the night. The list of names still spread before him. Aaliyah, Devon, Terrence, Nia. Each name was a child whose voice had been swallowed by Mrs. Whitaker's authority, whose stories were tucked away in whispers where no one dared to listen. He tapped the notepad with his finger, jaw tight. The principal wouldn't act. The school board, he knew from years of community meetings, rarely moved unless pressure forced their hand. One father's word against a respected white teacher was easy to dismiss. But what about hundreds of words? Thousands? Marcus pulled his phone closer. He opened Facebook, then paused, staring at the blank post box. He wasn't the kind of man who poured his heart online. He believed in fixing problems with his hands, in standing face to face. But face to face hadn't worked. Keller's smug smile had proved that. So he began to type. The words came out raw, unpolished but heavy with truth. My son's teacher has been taking away the lunches I pack for him, saying they aren't school approved. He's 12 years old, and instead of eating the food I make him, he sits hungry while his classmates laugh. She doesn't take anyone else's lunch, just his. Other black students have told him she's done things to them too. Lost projects, unfair detentions, public humiliation. And when I went to the principal, he brushed it off as a miscommunication. This isn't miscommunication. It's cruelty. It's racism. And I won't be silent while my boy is erased in his own classroom. Marcus reread it twice, his thumb hovering over the post button. He thought of Jamal upstairs, asleep, unaware that his father was about to open their lives to scrutiny. But silence was already crushing them. He hit post. By morning, the post had been shared a few dozen times. Old friends commented with shock. A few parents from the neighborhood chimed in, saying they believed him. For a brief moment, Marcus felt the stirrings of hope. But as the hours passed, the comments shifted. Teachers know best. Stop playing the race card. Maybe your son is exaggerating. Sounds like discipline, not discrimination. Marcus scrolled, his chest tightening. Some were crueler still. Anonymous accounts calling him a liar, accusing him of trying to smear a good teacher's name. One parent, whose child was in Jamal's class, wrote, "Mrs. Whitaker is wonderful. She's strict, but she cares. My son has never had a problem. Maybe the issue is at home." Marcus slammed the phone down on the table. His vision blurred. He had expected pushback, but the sheer weight of disbelief felt like being buried alive. That evening, Jamal walked in from school to find his father slumped at the table, phone in hand. "Dad?" Jamal asked carefully. "What's wrong?" Marcus looked up, his eyes tired. "I tried to tell people what's happening. I thought, if enough of them knew, they'd care. But they don't. They think I'm making it up." Jamal's face fell. He sat across from his father, his backpack sliding to the floor. "I told you," he whispered. "Nobody listens." The boy's words cut deeper than the comments online. Marcus reached across the table, grabbing Jamal's hand. "Hey, don't you believe that? Just because they don't listen now doesn't mean they never will." But even as he said it, Marcus felt the hollow weight of doubt pressing against his ribs. The following days stretched long and bitter. At work, Marcus found himself distracted, replaying the comments he'd read. Race card, liar, bad parenting. At home, he caught Jamal watching him carefully, as though trying to measure whether his father still believed in fighting. One night, as Marcus was cleaning up dishes, Jamal spoke quietly from the table. "Dad, maybe I should just eat the cafeteria food. It's easier. No one laughs then." Marcus froze, the plate in his hand dripping water back into the sink. He turned slowly, his voice sharp. "Easier for who? Easier for them. You think giving up your own lunch, the food I make for you, is easier?" Jamal lowered his gaze. "It's easier for me." The boy's voice was so small, so weary, that Marcus's anger cracked into sorrow. He set the plate down and walked over, crouching beside his son. "Champ," he said softly, "don't ever shrink yourself just to make other people comfortable. That's how they win. That's how they erase you." Jamal's lip trembled, but he nodded. Still, the doubt lingered in his eyes. By the end of the week, Marcus felt like he was screaming into a void. His post had been buried under news articles, memes, and neighborhood chatter. The shares had slowed, the comments had turned cold. People moved on, but Jamal's reality hadn't changed. On Friday afternoon, the phone rang at the auto shop. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and answered, expecting a customer. Instead, it was the school secretary, her voice clipped and tense. "Mr. Carter, you need to come to Ridgeway immediately. Your son collapsed in class." Marcus's heart lurched into his throat. "Collapsed? What do you mean collapsed?" "He fainted. The paramedics are on their way." The rag slipped from his hands. He was already grabbing his keys before she finished speaking. The drive to the school blurred past in a haze of red lights and pounding heartbeats. Marcus's hands shook on the steering wheel. He replayed Jamal's small voice in his head. Maybe I should just eat the cafeteria food. How many days had his boy gone hungry now? How many meals stolen in plain sight? When Marcus arrived, he ran through the front doors and down the hall toward Jamal's classroom. A cluster of students lingered outside, their faces pale. Inside, he saw his son sprawled on the floor, paramedics crouched around him. "Jamal," Marcus's voice cracked as he pushed forward. The boy stirred weakly, his eyelids fluttering open. "Dad," he whispered. Marcus knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "I'm here, champ. I'm here." One of the paramedics looked up. "He's dehydrated and hasn't eaten enough. We need to get him to the hospital to make sure it's nothing more serious." Marcus's stomach dropped. The truth was undeniable now, written in his son's frail body on the classroom floor. As the stretcher lifted Jamal away, Marcus looked up at Mrs. Whitaker standing in the corner. Her face was expressionless, cold, unbothered. And in that moment, Marcus swore he saw not guilt, but the faintest trace of satisfaction. The math classroom was quiet except for the squeak of chalk against the board. Rows of students hunched over worksheets, pencils scratching, the air thick with the mid-afternoon lull. Jamal sat near the back, his body slouched forward, his head heavy in his hands. His stomach growled louder than the whispers around him. But he pressed his notebook over it, embarrassed by the sound. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. His lunch, once again, was gone. Taken. Jamal blinked hard at the numbers swimming before him. Fractions, long division, things he normally understood. But today the page blurred. He gripped his pencil tighter, sweat forming along his hairline. Jamal, Mrs. Whitaker's voice cut across the room, sharp as a blade. Focus. You're daydreaming again. A ripple of giggles passed through the class. Jamal tried to sit up straighter, to prove he was paying attention. He opened his mouth to answer the problem on the board, but no words came. The room tilted. His pencil slipped from his hand. Then his body went limp. The thud of Jamal hitting the floor cracked through the classroom like a gunshot. Chairs scraped. Gasps erupted. He fell. Someone shouted. Students crowded in their seats, craning their necks. One girl screamed. Another boy darted for the hallway. Mrs. Whitaker stood frozen at the front of the class, her chalk still in hand. For a moment she didn't move. Her eyes locked on Jamal's small body sprawled on the floor, his limbs slack, his face pale. It was another teacher passing by who rushed in first, kneeling beside him. Call the nurse, now, she shouted. Only then did Mrs. Whitaker stir, fumbling for the phone. Her hand trembled, not with panic but with hesitation. By the time the school nurse arrived with a small medical kit, Jamal was barely conscious, his eyelids fluttering. His breath came shallow. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. He needs more than a nurse, the other teacher said urgently. Call an ambulance. The room dissolved into chaos. Students crying, the intercom crackling, footsteps pounding in the hall. Through it all, Mrs. Whitaker lingered by her desk, her face unreadable. Minutes later, paramedics wheeled a stretcher into the classroom. They lifted Jamal carefully, strapping him down as oxygen hissed through a mask pressed to his face. The chatter of students turned to murmurs. Some whispered, "Is he okay?" Others muttered, "He just fainted, right?" But the sight of Jamal's still body silenced even the loudest voices. Marcus arrived moments later, breathless, heart hammering. He burst through the door, his eyes locking on his son. Jamal. The boy stirred faintly, whispering, "Dad," through the mask. Marcus gripped his hand. "I'm here, champ. I'm right here." The paramedics pushed the stretcher toward the hallway. Marcus followed, his gaze flicking once to Mrs. Whitaker. She stood at the back of the room, her hands clasped, her face a mask of detachment. For just a second, Marcus swore he saw the faintest flicker of something colder than shock, satisfaction. The sight seared into him like fire. The ambulance ride was a blur. Marcus sat pressed against the wall, his son's small hand clenched in his. Every beep of the monitor made his chest ache.
Dehydrated. One paramedic muttered, checking Jamal's vitals. And his blood sugar's low. How many meals has he missed?
Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight, more than he should have. He thought of the untouched lunches, the crumpled note, the hollow look in his son's eyes each night. Fury burned inside him, not just at Mrs. Whitaker, but at every adult who had dismissed his warnings. At the hospital, doctors moved swiftly, hooking Jamal up to fluids, running tests. Marcus paced the corner of the room, his fists clenching and unclenching. He wanted answers, but all he could do was wait. Finally a doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter?" Marcus straightened. "That's me. How's my son?" The doctor adjusted his glasses. "He's stable now. The collapse was due to dehydration and lack of nutrition. His blood sugar dropped too low. He hasn't been eating regularly at school." Marcus's chest tightened. "I pack his lunch every day. Every single day." The doctor nodded slowly. "Then someone isn't letting him eat it." The words landed heavy, final. Marcus's fists curled. He had known it, but hearing it from a professional made the truth undeniable. When Jamal finally woke, his voice was small, cracked. "Dad?" Marcus sat beside him, gripping his hand. "I'm here, champ. You scared me half to death." "I'm sorry," Jamal whispered. His eyes filled with tears. I tried to be strong. Marcus shook his head, his own eyes burning. You don't ever have to apologize for being hungry. This isn't on you. It's on them. Jamal closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him back under. Marcus sat there, his hand never letting go. Hours later, as night fell outside the hospital window, Marcus stood by the glass, staring at the city lights. His phone buzzed with messages. Friends asking if the Facebook post was about his son, distant relatives offering prayers, coworkers telling him to stay strong. But not one message came from the school. Not one. He turned back to his son's pale face, to the IV dripping steadily into his arm. This wasn't miscommunication. This was neglect. This was cruelty. So blatant, it had put a child in a hospital bed. And still Marcus knew, when he confronted them again, they would find new excuses. As Marcus sat in the dim hospital room, the doctor's words echoed in his ears. He hasn't been eating regularly at school. Rage built inside him, sharper than ever. Tomorrow, he vowed, the school would answer for what they had done to his boy. The hospital discharged Jamal 2 days later. His body steadier but his spirit still heavy. Marcus carried his son's backpack for him, his hand firm at Jamal's back as though protecting him from every shadow on the walkout. The boy's silence was a weight Marcus couldn't ignore. By the time they reached the car, Marcus's decision had hardened into steel. Quiet conversations and polite complaints hadn't worked. The principal had brushed him off. The Facebook post had been dismissed. The only place left to be heard was in the open, where no one could pretend not to see. So when Ridgeway Middle announced its monthly PTA meeting, Marcus circled the date in red on his calendar. He didn't care if he had to walk in alone. He was going to speak. The cafeteria was transformed that night into a meeting hall. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, parents clustered in small groups, greeting one another with easy smiles. On the stage, a long table was set up, where the principal, teachers, and PTA officers sat, clipboards ready. Marcus entered quietly, Jamal's backpack slung over his shoulder. He spotted Keller at the center of the stage, his suit sharp, his smile practiced. To Keller's right sat Mrs. Whitaker, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm, almost serene. Marcus's chest tightened at the sight of her. Jamal's tormentor sitting there as though she were the model of professionalism. He took a seat near the front. Parents glanced at him curiously, some whispering his name. He recognized a few neighbors, coworkers, people he'd seen at Little League games. They nodded politely, but their smiles carried something else. Hesitation. The meeting began with the usual agenda. Budget updates, announcements about the school carnival, reminders about fundraising goals. Marcus sat stiff, his leg bouncing under his chair. Every second felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. Finally, Keller opened the floor for parent concerns. Marcus stood immediately. "Mr. Carter," Keller said smoothly, "you have the floor." Marcus's voice carried, steady but sharp. "My son collapsed in class last week because he hasn't been allowed to eat the lunches I pack for him. Mrs. Whitaker has taken them away, day after day, while letting other kids eat whatever they bring. And when I brought it to you, Mr. Keller, you called it a miscommunication. My son ended up in a hospital bed because of your miscommunication." A ripple ran through the room. Gasps, murmurs, the shifting of chairs. Parents glanced toward Mrs. Whitaker, who remained perfectly composed. Keller raised a hand. "Mr. Carter, please, let's keep emotions in check. We take all student health matters very seriously." Marcus's fists curled. "Emotions? My son fainted in class. You want me calm about that?" A woman in the second row spoke up. "I know Mrs. Whitaker. She's strict, but she's fair. My son says she pushes them to do better. Maybe your son misunderstood." Marcus turned toward her, his voice hard. He didn't misunderstand being hungry. Another parent chimed in, this time a man in a button-down shirt. "Our kids eat the cafeteria food every day. Maybe your son just didn't like it. That doesn't mean the teacher was wrong." Marcus's chest burned. She singled him out, took food no one else's child had taken. "You call that fair?" The room buzzed louder. Some parents looked away, uncomfortable. Others nodded subtly in support, but none spoke aloud. The silence stung worse than the criticism. Keller cleared his throat, his tone measured. "Mr. Carter, I understand your frustration, but Mrs. Whitaker has been with Ridgeway for over 15 years. She has an impeccable record." Marcus snapped, his voice rising. Her record means nothing if she's harming children now. Whitaker finally spoke, her voice calm, almost soothing. Mr. Carter, I assure you, I never intended harm. I only wanted what's best for Jamal. His lunches, well, they didn't meet the nutritional standards. Too greasy, too heavy. I was concerned about his health. Her words were delivered with such grace, such quiet confidence, that parents began nodding. Respectable, reasonable. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. You mean the baked chicken and apples I packed? That's what you call greasy? With the cafeteria pizza dripping with oil? That's nutritious? A murmur of laughter spread through the room, not at Marcus but at the absurdity of his comparison. Yet Keller leaned forward quickly, cutting him off. Mr. Carter, please. This isn't a trial. Mrs. Whitaker acted with good intentions. Let's not vilify a teacher over a misunderstanding. That word again. Misunderstanding. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. Every word Whitaker spoke, every nod from the parents around him, was another brick in a wall built to shut him out. Marcus took a breath, his voice trembling, but strong. My son isn't the only one. Other kids told him their projects disappeared, that they got detentions for nothing, that their voices don't matter in her class. How many more kids have to suffer before you listen? For the first time, Whitaker's calm faltered, her lips pressed into a thin line, but Keller leaned in, his tone dismissive. Rumors and anecdotes are not evidence. If parents have concerns, they should bring them to me directly. Marcus's laugh was bitter. I did bring it to you. You did nothing. Now my boy's health is proof enough. The room grew restless. Parents shifted in their seats. Some avoided Marcus's gaze, while others whispered defensively about protecting the school's reputation. A man in the back stood. Look, I don't know all the details, but Mrs. Whitaker's taught here for years. She's respected. Maybe this is just being blown out of proportion. Marcus turned on him, his voice cutting through the noise. Proportion? My son was carried out of class on a stretcher. You tell me what proportion that belongs in. The room fell into uneasy silence. Keller cleared his throat once more, his tone final. Mr. Carter will review the situation internally. But for now I ask that we move on. We won't resolve this here tonight. Marcus stared at him, the fury in his chest threatening to spill over. He scanned the room at the parents who defended Whitaker, at the ones too afraid to speak, at the teacher herself, still sitting with her calm mask in place. He realized then what Jamal had known all along. No one was coming to save them. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus walked out into the night air, his fists clenched. He had spoken his truth, laid it bare in front of everyone, and still, they had dismissed it. Wrapped lies in respectability, smoothed cruelty into good intentions. He looked up at the dark sky, the cold air burning his lungs. In that moment, Marcus swore to himself, if the system wouldn't protect his son, he would. Quiet wasn't working. Respectability wasn't working. Next time he wasn't going to ask for justice. He was going to take it into his own hands. Marcus barely slept after the PTA meeting. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the empty chairs, at the neat row of lunch containers drying on the counter. Every face from the meeting replayed in his mind. The polite nods, the forced smiles, the dismissive words. Strict, but fair. Maybe it's blown out of proportion. We'll review it internally. The phrases pressed on him like bricks. Respectability wrapped around cruelty, smothering the truth. If they wanted evidence, he would give them evidence. The next morning, Marcus rose before dawn. He moved quietly, careful not to wake Jamal. On the kitchen table sat a small black box he'd ordered overnight. Something he had never imagined himself buying. A mini camera small enough to fit inside a lunchbox. It synced directly to his phone, recording and saving everything. He held it in his hand for a long moment. This wasn't just about food anymore. It was about proof. It was about giving Jamal back his voice when the world refused to hear it. Marcus packed Jamal's lunch with steady hands. Roasted chicken, sweet potato, a granola bar, apple slices. Then carefully, he nestled the camera inside the lunchbox, hidden among the foil. When Jamal entered the kitchen, yawning, Marcus slid the backpack toward him. Here's your lunch, champ. Jamal eyed him warily. You look different. Marcus forced a smile. Just tired. Go on, now. Eat every bite today. Jamal's nod was hesitant, but he didn't ask questions. He slung the backpack over his shoulder and left for school. Marcus stood at the window, watching him walk down the street. His chest tightened. Today would be different. Today the truth would be caught on camera. At the auto shop, Marcus set his phone on the workbench. He couldn't focus on carburetors and oil changes. His eyes darted to the live feed every few minutes, watching shaky images from Jamal's backpack, hallways filled with chatter, the blur of classrooms, the muffled hum of the lunchroom bell. Then came the cafeteria. Marcus's breath caught as Jamal set his backpack on the table and began to unzip it. The camera tilted, catching flashes of students opening takeout bags, unwrapping foil, slurping juice boxes. Jamal lifted the foil on his lunch. Marcus felt a swell of pride just seeing his boy prepare to eat the food he had made. Then a shadow fell over the table. Jamal Carter. Marcus's fists clenched as Mrs. Whitaker's voice cut through the feed. The image jostled as her pale hand reached into the lunchbox. "What do we have today? Greasy chicken again?" Laughter rippled faintly in the background. "School rules," she said, her voice crisp. "You'll thank me later when you're not clogging your arteries before high school." The screen shook as she plucked the food from his hands, tossing it into the trash can behind her. The crunch of foil hitting garbage tore through Marcus's chest. But then something else happened. Something Marcus hadn't expected. Mrs. Whitaker didn't walk away immediately. She turned slightly toward another teacher standing near the cafeteria door. "Honestly," she said in a low voice, though the camera caught every word, "these kids, they bring this kind of food from home, and then we wonder why their grades are low. It's cultural. They don't value discipline the way others do." The other teacher gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. "Well, at least you're trying to set him straight." Marcus froze. His lungs felt tight, his hands trembling over the phone screen. "It's cultural." The words echoed like a curse. This wasn't just about Jamal's lunch. This was about an entire judgment cast over him. Over their family, over who they were. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. His coworkers glanced at him, confused. But he didn't explain. His heart pounded too hard. He shut the live feed off, his chest burning. It was worse than he thought. That night when Jamal came home, Marcus asked no questions. He simply hugged his son longer than usual, holding him until Jamal squirmed away, embarrassed. Marcus said softly, "You did good today, champ." Jamal blinked. "Why?" Marcus just shook his head. "Because you keep going, even when they don't want you to." Later that night, when Jamal was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table again, his phone glowing in his hand. He replayed the footage, over and over. Mrs. Whitaker's voice was sharp, unyielding. Her words about cultural habits dripped with disdain. The laughter of the other teacher ewer behind her. He had the proof. He had more than proof. But something inside Marcus twisted. Proof alone wouldn't be enough. Not in a system that already called his complaints miscommunication. Not with parents who defended her as strict but fair. They would find a way to explain this away too. Say she was concerned about nutrition. Say the comment was taken out of context. Marcus knew then that his fight was just beginning. The next morning, he tucked his phone into his pocket like a weapon. He walked Jamal to the bus stop, his mind already racing. This footage could blow the doors off the polite wall of silence around Mrs. Whitaker, but it could also backfire, pulling his family into scrutiny they weren't ready for. Marcus clenched his fists in his jacket. The world hadn't believed his words. Would they believe the truth staring them in the face? As Marcus replayed the footage one last time, he noticed something chilling in the corner of the frame. Mrs. Whitaker glancing directly toward Jamal's backpack, her lips curling in the faintest of smirks. It was as if she knew she was being watched. Marcus sat at the kitchen table again, his phone glowing in the dim light. He had replayed the footage dozens of times already. But something gnawed at him. A pull to go back one more time. He tapped the screen, scrolling past the part where Mrs. Whitaker stole Jamal's food, past her comment about cultural discipline, until he reached a section he hadn't listened to carefully before. The camera's lens was tilted slightly, angled at the cafeteria floor, but the audio was crisp. Mrs. Whitaker's voice carried clear as day. "Honestly," she said, laughter in her tone, "his dad probably doesn't even know how to cook anything that isn't fried. Every day, it's the same. Some greasy little ghetto meal, wrapped in foil. You can smell it down the hall." Marcus's blood ran cold. A group of students near the table laughed nervously. One boy muttered, "Yeah, smells weird sometimes." Mrs. Whitaker chuckled. "Exactly. We're preparing these kids for the future. What's Jamal gonna do if he thinks this is normal? He'll end up working in some fast food place, if that." The laughter grew louder, emboldened by her tone. Marcus slammed his hand against the table so hard, the phone rattled, his chest heaved, fury coursing through him like fire. Ghetto meals. Fast food future. It wasn't whispered prejudice. It was bold, public humiliation, cloaked in authority. The next clip made Marcus's breath hitch even more. Jamal's voice, soft, trembling. Please, can I just eat today? My dad made it for me. Mrs. Whitaker's reply was sharp, dismissive. You'll eat what the school provides. Stop trying to be special. Laughter again. The sound of foil hitting the trash. Marcus pressed a hand to his face, his throat burning. He thought of Jamal clutching his backpack every afternoon, lying about eating, hiding his shame. He thought of the faint smile on Mrs. Whitaker's face at the PTA meeting, calm and untouched while he stood begging for his son's dignity. Now the mask was ripped away. Marcus didn't move for a long time. He just sat there staring at the screen, his pulse loud in his ears. His anger was no longer just anger. It was grief. It was humiliation. It was the rage of every silence he had swallowed in his own childhood. When Jamal shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes from sleep, Marcus quickly locked the phone. You okay, Dad? Jamal asked softly. Marcus forced a nod. Yeah, champ. I'm okay. But his voice cracked, and Jamal tilted his head. You don't look okay. Marcus reached over, pulling his son into a hug so tight, Jamal squirmed. I promise you, champ, he whispered. This ends now. The next day, Marcus showed the footage to a close friend, Darren, who worked at a local news station. Darren's eyes widened as the video played, his jaw tightening. Man, this is damning, Darren said. But you know how they'll spin it. They'll say context, they'll say editing, they'll say you're twisting it. Marcus shook his head. This isn't out of context. This is her voice, clear as day. She mocked my boy. She called our food ghetto meals. She threw it away while kids laughed. Darren leaned back, exhaling. You post this online, it'll go viral. But be ready. The backlash will be ugly. They'll come for you for Jamal. You sure you're ready for that? Marcus thought of his son collapsing on the classroom floor. He thought of Jamal's whisper, maybe I should just eat the cafeteria food. His answer came steady. I don't care if they come for me. They won't erase my son again. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table once more. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Jamal was asleep, his backpack resting against the chair. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the footage. His hands trembled as he clipped the video, trimming it to the most damning moments. Mrs. Whitaker's mocking voice, the laughter of students, Jamal's soft plea, the final sound of food hitting the trash. He added a caption. This is what my 12-year-old son faces at Ridgeway Middle School. His teacher takes his home-cooked meals, calls them ghetto, and laughs while throwing them away. When I complained, the school called it a miscommunication. Watch for yourself. His finger hovered over the upload button. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. Once this was online, there would be no turning back. His family's privacy would shatter. Jamal's story would no longer belong just to them. But silence had already cost too much. Marcus clicked upload. At first, the video moved slowly. 10 views, 50, 100. Then it began to spread. Someone retweeted it with the caption, if this is true, it's horrifying. Within hours, the numbers shot into the thousands. By midnight, it had crossed 50,000 views. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, watching the counter climb, his phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. Some comments flooded in with outrage. This is disgusting. Fire her immediately. No child deserves this. But others were cruel, dismissive, exactly as Darren had warned. Context matters. Kids exaggerate. Maybe his dad just wants attention. Marcus scrolled through the flood of reactions, his stomach twisting. For every voice that believed, there was another ready to tear them down. But the video kept climbing. By morning, it had surpassed 200,000 views. When Marcus dropped Jamal at school the next day, parents lingered by the gate, whispering. Some gave him supportive nods. Others looked at him with suspicion, lips tight. Jamal walked with his head low, already sensing the weight of the storm. Marcus knelt beside him. Keep your head up, champ. This isn't your shame. It's theirs. Jamal nodded faintly, but his eyes stayed on the ground. By mid-afternoon, the story had been picked up by local blogs, then regional news outlets. Marcus's phone buzzed nonstop, reporters asking for interviews, activists offering support, strangers flooding his inbox with both encouragement and threats. He sat at his workbench in the auto shop, phone glowing in his palm. The video had crossed 1 million views. His heart pounded. For the first time, Marcus felt the tide shift. The silence that had buried Jamal's voice was cracking. But as the video exploded across the internet, Marcus also knew this storm was about to engulf them all. By the third morning, the numbers were no longer just climbing. They were erupting. Marcus refreshed his phone and saw the counter flash past 2 million views. Headlines had begun to spill across news feeds. Teacher caught mocking black students' lunch in shocking video. Father exposes racism at Ridgeway Middle. School under fire after viral footage surfaces. Marcus sat in the auto shop's break room, his lunch untouched. His coworkers gathered around his phone, eyes wide. "Man," one of them muttered. "This thing's everywhere. I just saw it on the morning news." Marcus's chest felt tight. He had wanted people to see, to know, but he hadn't been prepared for the way the internet could devour a story whole. By afternoon, reporters were parked outside Ridgeway Middle. Camera crews filmed students as they walked out, microphones flashing in their faces. Some kids smirked, soaking in the attention. Others ducked their heads, uncomfortable. Jamal walked stiffly through the crowd, his backpack slung high. When a reporter shoved a microphone toward him, Marcus stepped in quickly, his arm around his son. "No questions," Marcus said firmly, ushering Jamal toward the car. He felt Jamal's small body tense under his arm. Fame wasn't what his boy needed. Safety was. At home, Marcus's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. "Thank you for exposing this. You're a hero for your son. She should never teach again." But the darker messages came too. "You're ruining a good woman's career. Stop playing the race card. You people always want handouts." Marcus read them in silence, his jaw tightening. Every hateful word was a reminder that while the video had forced the truth into light, it hadn't erased the ugliness underneath. The school board could no longer stay silent. Within days, they issued a statement, their words crafted like polished stone. "Ridgeway Middle School is aware of a video circulating online. We take allegations of discrimination seriously and have placed the staff member in question on administrative leave pending investigation." Marcus read the statement aloud at the kitchen table, Jamal listening quietly beside him. "Administrative leave," Marcus muttered. "That means suspended with pay." Jamal frowned. "So she still gets to sit at home and do nothing?" Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah. While we wait for them to decide if what we saw with our own eyes even counts." Local news stations camped outside their home, waiting for comments. Marcus kept his answers short, his eyes tired but steady. "All I want," he told one reporter, "is for my son to be treated like every other child, to eat his food in peace, to be seen as a student, not a problem. Is that too much to ask?" The clip aired that evening. By the next morning, national outlets picked it up. The story had jumped from a local scandal to a national debate. Talk shows dissected the video. Commentators argued about intent versus perception. Parents on social media split into factions, some demanding Mrs. Whitaker's firing, others insisting she was being unfairly attacked. At school, the tension was palpable. Jamal returned to whispers and stares. Some students offered quiet smiles of support. Others mocked him, parroting their parents' words. "My mom says your dad ruined Mrs. Whitaker's life," one boy sneered in the hallway. Jamal kept walking, his head low, but the words cut deep. When he got home, he dropped his backpack by the door and sat silently at the kitchen table. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "They don't know the truth, champ. They only know what they want to believe." Jamal's voice was barely a whisper. "Feels like nobody wants to believe us." Marcus's chest ached. He wanted to tell his son that the millions of views mattered, that the outrage meant something, but he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Days later, the school board held a press conference. Marcus stood in the back of the crowded auditorium, reporters' cameras flashing. A board representative stepped to the podium, clearing his throat. "After reviewing initial evidence, we have decided that Mrs. Whitaker will remain on administrative leave while we conduct a thorough investigation. We ask for patience as we work toward a resolution." The words washed over Marcus, like cold water. No acknowledgement of Jamal, no apology, no justice yet. Parents around him whispered, some defending Whitaker, others murmuring frustration. Marcus clenched his fists. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but he held his tongue for now. That evening, Marcus sat with Jamal in the living room. The TV replayed clips of the press conference. pundits debating whether the video was enough to warrant firing. Jamal turned to his father, eyes heavy. What if she comes back? Marcus looked at him, his jaw tight. She won't. Not after this. Too many people are watching. But even as he said it, a shadow of doubt flickered in his mind. 2 days later, Marcus got the call. It was Keller, his voice smooth as ever. Mr. Carter, I wanted you to hear it from me. Mrs. Whitaker has been officially suspended while we continue our review. Marcus gripped the phone tight. Suspended, he repeated. Yes, Keller said. We'll provide updates as the process continues. Thank you for your patience. Marcus hung up, his chest heavy. He looked at Jamal, who waited anxiously. She's suspended, Marcus said softly. For the first time in weeks, Jamal's shoulders relaxed slightly. So, it's over. Marcus forced a smile, but his gut twisted. Yeah, champ, it's over. But deep down, he knew better. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. Among the flood of messages, one made his stomach drop. It was a screenshot sent by a friend. A private Facebook group. Parents from the school, rallying under the banner, "Support Mrs. Whitaker." In bold letters, the post read, "She's being unfairly targeted. We need to fight back." Marcus stared at the screen, his chest burning. The storm wasn't over. It was only shifting. Mrs. Whitaker might be suspended, but Marcus felt it in his bones. She wasn't finished, and the next move she made could be more dangerous than anything so far. The suspension of Mrs. Whitaker made headlines for a week straight. Local news crews stood outside Ridgeway Middle, with cameras pointed at the school sign. National outlets debated the ethics of teachers policing nutrition. Hashtags trended. Some celebrated the suspension as overdue accountability. Others fumed that a respected educator had been unfairly attacked by an angry parent with a camera. For Marcus, it was never about the headlines. It was about Jamal. But even as the world's eyes turned to their story, the storm began to change direction, and soon it was pointed straight at their home. The first letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. Marcus found it wedged in the screen door one evening after work. He tore it open on the porch, the words scrawled in uneven block letters. "You're destroying a good woman's career. Watch your back." Marcus froze, the paper trembling in his hand. He looked up and down the street, neighbors mowing lawns, kids riding bikes, everything ordinary. But the note in his palm felt like a crack in the ground beneath him. He crumpled it into his pocket and walked inside, his jaw tight. Jamal sat at the table working on math homework, his pencil scratching. Marcus forced a smile he didn't feel. "How was school today, champ?" Jamal shrugged. "Okay." But Marcus saw the lie in his son's eyes. The truth came out 2 days later. Jamal came home with his backpack torn, the zipper dangling. Marcus caught sight of the rip and frowned. "What happened here?" Jamal hesitated, then whispered, "Some boys shoved me in the hallway. Said I ruined the school's name. Said their parents are mad because of me." Marcus's blood ran hot. "They touched you?" Jamal shook his head quickly. "Not really. Just pushed my bag. They laughed." His voice cracked. "They called me a snitch." Marcus knelt in front of him, his voice steady though his chest burned. "Listen to me, champ. You didn't ruin anything. You told the truth. Don't ever be ashamed of that." Jamal's eyes welled up. "But everyone hates me now." Marcus pulled him into a hug, his voice low. "Not everyone. Not me. Not the people who matter." But the backlash only grew. Marcus's phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Sometimes when he answered, there was silence. Other times, a voice hissed through the line. "You think you're some hero? You're a troublemaker. Better watch your boy. Kids who cry wolf don't last long." One evening, Marcus found spray-painted words on his garage door. "Liar." The letters dripped red, like blood. He stood there staring, fists clenched, while neighbors peered from behind curtains. No one stepped forward. No one said a word. At school, Jamal's world shrank smaller each day. Friends who once sat with him at lunch drifted to other tables, not wanting to be caught in the middle. Notes appeared in his locker. "Go back to your greasy food. Your dad's embarrassing us." One afternoon, Marcus picked Jamal up and found him sitting alone on the curb, his head buried in his knees. "Champ?" Marcus crouched beside him. Jamal's voice was muffled. "I wish you never posted the video." Marcus's chest cracked open. He pulled his son close, whispering, "I did it so you'd never have to hide again. I did it for you." But Jamal shook his head. tears streaking his cheeks. Now everyone hates me. She's gone, but it's worse. Marcus held him tighter, fighting back his own tears. Speaking the truth had freed them from silence, but now it felt like standing in a storm with no shelter. The threats escalated. Anonymous emails filled Marcus's inbox, some with racial slurs, some promising revenge. Packages arrived with nothing inside but crumpled paper. Jamal's teachers reported that students snickered whenever his name was called in class. Marcus began sleeping lighter, waking at the faintest sound outside. Every knock on the door made his chest tighten. One night, as he double-checked the locks, he muttered to himself, "They want to scare us quiet." But even as he said it, fear gnawed at him. Because it wasn't just him they were trying to silence. It was Jamal. The twist came one rainy Thursday evening. Marcus arrived home to find a thick envelope wedged in the mailbox, stamped with the seal of the county court. His stomach dropped as he tore it open, water soaking the edges. Inside was a legal notice. "You are hereby notified that Mrs. Patricia Whitaker has filed a civil suit against you for defamation of character, citing damages to reputation and career. Court date pending." Marcus's breath caught. His hands shook as he read the words again. Defamation. Damages. Career. Jamal peeked from the hallway. "Dad, what's that?" Marcus forced the papers behind his back, his heart pounding. "Nothing you need to worry about right now, champ." But his mind raced. Mrs. Whitaker wasn't done. Even suspended, even disgraced, she had found a way to strike back. And now she wasn't just trying to erase Jamal. She was coming for Marcus too. Marcus stared at the notice in his hands, rain dripping from the envelope onto the floor. Mrs. Whitaker had declared war, and this time the battlefield would be a courtroom. Marcus Carter never thought he'd find himself at the center of a courtroom battle. He wasn't a man built for legal fights. He was a man of grease-stained hands, long hours under the hood of cars, and the quiet dignity of providing for his boy. But as he stood in front of the courthouse with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing, he knew he had no choice. Mrs. Whitaker's lawsuit had turned their story into a spectacle. Headlines screamed, "Teacher sues father over viral video." Accusations of racism lead to court clash. Ridgeway Middle at the center of scandal. The courthouse steps became a stage. Protesters gathered on both sides, some holding signs reading "Protect Black Students," while others waved placards that said "Stand with our teachers." The noise was deafening, but Marcus kept his head high, Jamal's small hand tucked firmly in his own. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and tension. The pews were packed with spectators, journalists scribbling in notebooks, and community members craning their necks for a glimpse. At the front, the judge presided with a heavy expression, already weary of the circus this case had become. Marcus sat at the defendant's table beside his attorney, a sharp-eyed black woman named Angela Hughes. Across from them sat Mrs. Whitaker in a navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back, her posture perfect. Her lawyer, a gray-haired man with a commanding voice, shuffled papers with quiet confidence. The air felt thick, like every breath carried weight. The trial began with Whitaker's lawyer painting a portrait of his client, a dedicated teacher, beloved by parents, unfairly slandered by a disgruntled father. "Mrs. Whitaker has given 15 years of her life to Ridgeway Middle," he declared. "Her reputation, her career, her livelihood, all destroyed by a video taken out of context, edited to vilify her. We are here today to restore her good name and to hold Ms. Carter accountable for reckless defamation." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout. She wasn't taken out of context. "She mocked my boy." But he stayed silent, his attorney squeezing his arm, reminding him to let the evidence speak. Angela rose, her voice calm but fierce. "This case isn't about defamation. It's about truth. It's about a 12-year-old boy who was humiliated and starved by the very person entrusted to protect him. The video is not an edit. It is a window into what Jamal Carter endured under Miss Whitaker's care. And once that window was opened, more voices came forward, voices that can no longer be ignored." She gestured toward the gallery. Marcus turned slightly and saw them. Aaliyah's parents, Dovin's mother, Terrence's uncle, families who had whispered their pain, now sat tall, ready to speak. Marcus felt a swell of strength in his chest. The first days of testimony were brutal. Mrs. Whitaker's lawyer called character witnesses, white parents who praised her discipline, her high standards, her commitment to fairness. "My son never had a problem with Mrs. Whitaker," one father testified. She pushed him to be better. If she was strict, it was only because she cared. The words cut like glass. Marcus knew what they meant, without saying it. She's good with our kids. The problem must be yours. Jamal sat in the back of the courtroom, his shoulders hunched, listening to adults dismiss his pain as exaggeration. Marcus squeezed his hand during breaks, whispering, "Your truth matters, champ. Don't let their words sink in." Then came the defense's turn. Angela called Jamal to the stand. The courtroom hushed as the boy walked forward, his small frame swallowed by the witness chair. His voice was shaky at first, but as Angela guided him, the words poured out. "She took my lunches, said they weren't healthy, but other kids brought burgers and fries, and she didn't take theirs. She called my food greasy, and when I asked if I could just eat, she said I was trying to be special." His voice cracked, but he lifted his chin. "I fainted in class because I was hungry." The silence was heavy, broken only by the scribble of reporters' pens. The footage followed. Angela played the recording from the hidden camera, the screen set up for all to see. Mrs. Whitaker's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Some greasy little ghetto meal. Fast food future." Gasps rippled across the room. Even the judge's brow furrowed. Angela let the words hang before saying quietly, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not taken out of context. This is context." Mrs. Whitaker's face remained composed, but a faint flush crept up her neck. One by one, other families took the stand. Aaliyah's mother spoke of the missing art project, her voice trembling with anger. "My daughter cried herself to sleep, thinking she failed. We found her drawing stuffed in the bottom of her backpack weeks later. Graded 0. Devon's mother testified about the endless detentions. He was punished for raising his hand too slow, for sharpening his pencil, for existing. I complained once. Keller said I was imagining things." Each voice added another brick to the wall of evidence. Marcus sat listening, his chest swelling with pride. Their courage multiplied, and for the first time, Mrs. Whitaker looked small. But the fight wasn't over. Whitaker's lawyer tried to twist the narrative. "These parents are upset because Mrs. Whitaker holds high standards," he argued. "Discipline is never popular. This is not racism, it's rigor." Marcus felt rage claw at his throat. But Angela stood, her voice cutting sharp. "Rigor does not look like throwing away a child's meal. It does not look like mocking their culture. It does not look like starving a boy until he collapses in class. That is not rigor. That is cruelty." The courtroom buzzed, whispers rippling through the crowd. When closing arguments came, Marcus's heart pounded so loud he could barely hear the words. Whitaker's lawyer painted her as a victim of a smear campaign. Angela reminded the jury of Jamal's collapse, of the voices of children long silenced. Marcus closed his eyes, praying. Not for himself, but for Jamal, for every child erased in silence. The jury deliberated for hours. Marcus sat in the hallway with Jamal's hand in his, staring at the courtroom doors. Reporters hovered nearby, cameras ready. Each tick of the clock was a hammer against his ribs. Finally, the bailiff called them back in. The room fell silent as the judge prepared to read the decision. Marcus gripped Jamal's hand tighter. His breath held. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the room. In the matter of Patricia Whitaker versus Marcus Carter, he paused, the words heavy in the air. The court finds. The air in the courtroom was so still, it felt as though no one dared breathe. The judge's voice carried over the silence, deep and steady. In the matter of Patricia Whitaker versus Marcus Carter, the court finds in favor of the defendant, Marcus Carter. The words hit like a bell tolling through the room. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders sagging for the first time in weeks, his hand gripping Jamal's tightly. His boy's eyes widened, disbelief flickering into relief. The judge continued, his tone deliberate. Furthermore, in reviewing evidence presented in this trial, and testimony from multiple families, the court is compelled to refer Mrs. Whitaker's conduct to the state licensing board. Allegations of misconduct spanning years were buried, ignored or dismissed by school administration. That pattern is now undeniable. Mrs. Whitaker's composure cracked, her lips pressed thin, her eyes darting to her lawyer. A faint flush crept over her neck as murmurs swept the courtroom. Angela Hughes leaned closer to Marcus, whispering, "It's over. She's done." But Marcus shook his head slightly. It's not over for Jamal. His eyes never left his son, who still sat stiff, as though waiting for the ground to fall away again. The judge's final words landed heavy. Effective immediately, Patricia Whitaker is barred from teaching until the licensing board renders its decision. Given the evidence, it is highly unlikely her license will be reinstated. It was the closest thing to justice Marcus had hoped for. Delayed. Bitter. But real. Outside, the courthouse steps erupted into chaos. Reporters swarmed, microphones extended, cameras flashing. Marcus shielded Jamal with his arm, guiding him down the steps. Protesters on both sides shouted louder. Now some cheering, some jeering, their voices colliding in the air. Marcus, how do you feel? Do you believe justice was served? What about Mrs. Whitaker's career? Marcus's jaw clenched. He stopped briefly, looked straight into the cameras, and said firmly, "This was never about her career. This was about my son's dignity. About every child who deserves to be seen, fed, and respected. Justice isn't a gift. It's a right." The crowd roared. Some clapped, some shouted back angrily. But Marcus turned, walking Jamal toward the car, his boy's small hand wrapped tight in his. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with Jamal across from him. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. "You hear what the judge said?" Marcus asked. Jamal nodded slowly. "She can't be a teacher anymore." "That's right." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Because you spoke the truth. Because you didn't let her erase you." Jamal's eyes flickered with something Marcus hadn't seen in weeks. Pride. But it was mixed with something else too. Fear. "Dad," Jamal whispered, "what if everyone looks at me different now? What if they hate me more?" Marcus reached across the table, resting his calloused hand over Jamal's. "Then let them look. Because when they do, they'll see a boy who stood tall when the world tried to make him small. And they'll know they can't break you." In the days that followed, news outlets dug deeper. Investigations uncovered a trail of complaints against Mrs. Whitaker. Parents who had spoken up years earlier only to be dismissed by Principal Keller. Notes and files marked resolved without action. Students who transferred out of Ridgeway quietly, their stories forgotten. One headline read, "Pattern of discrimination uncovered. Ridgeway Middle under fire." For Marcus, it was vindication. Not just for Jamal, but for every child who had been silenced. Justice delayed, yes, but it burned brighter now that it had finally come. Yet victory carried weight. At school, Jamal's return was anything but ordinary. The morning he walked through the front doors again, whispers followed him like shadows. Students stared openly, some curious, some resentful. A few nodded in respect, but others sneered, muttering as he passed. "There's the kid who got her fired. Snitch. Bet he thinks he's special now." Jamal kept his eyes forward, his backpack straps clenched tight in his hands. Each step felt heavier under the weight of so many eyes. Marcus had walked him to the doors that morning, crouching down before letting him go. "Remember what I told you, champ. You don't bow your head. You walk in, knowing you belong. Because you do." Jamal had nodded, but as the hallway swallowed him, Marcus felt the knot in his own chest tighten. In homeroom, Jamal slid into his usual seat. The desk felt smaller, the air thicker. Conversations hushed as he sat. He stared at his notebook, pretending to write, his ears burning. The substitute teacher greeted the class warmly, her smile kind, but Jamal barely heard her. His mind was fixed on the stairs, on the whispers, on the way even silence felt louder now. The trial had ended. Whitaker was gone. But for Jamal, the story wasn't finished. Not yet. As Jamal lifted his eyes, he realized every gaze in the room was fixed on him. The fight in the courtroom was over, but the one in the hallways of Ridgeway Middle was just beginning. The seasons shifted quietly in Ridgeway. Summer's heavy heat gave way to crisp autumn air, the leaves along the sidewalks burning gold and red. Months had passed since the verdict, since the courtroom gasps in the headlines announcing Mrs. Whitaker's downfall. Life, as it always does, had tried to return to normal. But for Jamal, normal had a new meaning. He still carried the same lunchbox, blue with a faded superhero decal on the side. The zipper tugged slightly from use, but it was sturdy, dependable. A quiet symbol of his father's care. For a long time, he had dreaded unzipping it in public, his heart pounding with the memory of Whitaker's hand snatching it away. But now, when he placed it on the cafeteria table, he did it with steady hand. That lunchbox, once a source of shame, had become something else entirely. A reminder, a shield, a banner of pride. The cafeteria buzzed, as always. Voices overlapping, trays clattering, sneakers squeaking across the floor. But Jamal noticed the difference. Where once kids snickered or stared, now some simply nodded as he passed. A few even slid into the seats beside him. Aaliyah sat across from him, her braids tied back in neat rows. Devon dropped his tray beside her. Mia joined too, clutching a sandwich from home. "Mind if I sit?" she asked softly. Jamal shook his head. Of course not. They ate together, the silence between them warm, not heavy. For the first time in months, Jamal felt less like a target, and more like part of something bigger. A new teacher walked the aisles now. Miss Ramirez, her voice carrying warmth instead of ice. She greeted students by name, smiled at their jokes, and leaned down to ask about their projects. When she passed Jamal's table, she paused, her eyes "Looks good, Jamal. Your dad must be a great cook." The words were simple, but they landed like a balm. Jamal smiled faintly, the knot in his chest loosening. It was such a small thing to have his food acknowledged, not mocked. To be seen, not erased. Marcus noticed the change too. When Jamal came home now, he carried empty containers instead of spoiled meals. His appetite was steady, his eyes brighter. He talked more at dinner, about friends, about assignments, about small victories in class. Marcus listened, pride swelling. The scars of the ordeal hadn't vanished, but his son was healing. One evening, Jamal unzipped his backpack and set the blue lunchbox on the table. "Dad," he said quietly, "I finished it all today." Marcus smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's my champ. That lunchbox is undefeated now." Jamal grinned.
Yeah, it is.
But not everything was celebration. The whispers still existed. Some parents still muttered about what happened, still clung to the belief that Mrs. Whitaker had been wronged. Jamal still felt the sting of certain stares in the hallway, the chill of classmates who refused to sit near him. Yet he carried on, and each day he unzipped that lunchbox in front of everyone. He reclaimed a piece of what had been taken. One chilly afternoon, Marcus was invited back to Ridgeway, not as a complainant this time, but as a speaker. The school board, under pressure, had launched new initiatives on equity and respect. They asked Marcus to share his perspective with staff and parents. Standing at the front of the library, Marcus looked out at the faces before him. Some were supportive, some skeptical. He cleared his throat. "This isn't just about my son's lunch," he said firmly. "It's about dignity, about what happens when a child's voice is ignored because adults think they know better. My boy's lunch was taken, but what really got stolen was his sense of belonging, and that's something no parent should have to watch." The room was silent, his words cutting through the quiet. Later that week, Jamal returned to school and found a surprise waiting for him in the cafeteria. Several students had brought food from home, different meals, different smells filling the air. Instead of hiding them, they placed them proudly on the table. Aaliyah's mother had made curry chicken. Devon's aunt had packed gumbo. Mia smiled as she unwrapped her sandwich. "If you can eat your food here, we all can." Jamal looked around the table, his chest swelling. For once the laughter around him wasn't at him, it was with him. But the memory of those dark months never left him entirely. Some nights, when the house was quiet, Jamal still remembered the sound of foil hitting the trash, the smirk on Whitaker's face, the sting of classmates' laughter. The scars were real. Marcus knew this. That was why, every morning, he packed Jamal's lunch with steady hands, sliding the containers into the same blue lunchbox. Not just food, but a promise. "Eat it all, champ," he would say. "Every bite. You earned it." And Jamal would nod, not with fear, but with pride. One afternoon, months after the trial, Jamal sat at the cafeteria table, his lunchbox open before him. The room buzzed as always, but he felt steady. Aaliyah and Devon laughed beside him. Ms. Ramirez walked by, offering her usual kind smile. Jamal lifted his fork, took a bite of collard greens, and for the first time, didn't flinch at the sound of laughter nearby. Because this time it wasn't aimed at him. This time, he belonged. Marcus picked him up that day, watching as his son walked toward the car, his shoulders straighter, his steps lighter. "How was lunch?" Marcus asked, as Jamal climbed in. Jamal grinned. "It was good. Real good." Marcus exhaled. A weight lifting. The same lunchbox that had once been a weapon of humiliation had become a banner of resilience. Yet as they drove home, Marcus's eyes lingered on the road ahead, his thoughts darker. For every Jamal, how many other children still sat in cafeterias across the country, their lunches hidden, their voices silenced, their dignity stolen in quiet acts no one recorded. The lunchbox sat on Jamal's lap, a symbol of victory hard-earned. But Marcus's final thought lingered like a shadow. How many children's silent lunches are still being taken today, without anyone to see, to believe, to fight for them? No child should ever be made to feel small for who they are, or go hungry because of prejudice disguised as rules. If this story touched you, type yes if you believe every child deserves dignity.